Let's get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Brown University Master of Science and Technology Leadership webinar. My name is Pete Chomowicz. I'm the Program Director. And today we've got one of our faculty who's going to give a talk from her research. And it gives all of you that are interested in the program a sense about her teaching philosophy, what it is she works on, and why her work is so critical to our degree. So let me just introduce our guest today. Banu Ozkanzik-Pan is the Barrett Hazelton Professor of the Practice of Engineering in the School of Engineering here at Brown and the founder and director of the Venture Capital Inclusion Lab at Brown's Nelson Center for Entrepreneurship. Banu's research focuses on culture and inclusion in venture capital and innovation ecosystems. She is a prolific academic researcher and scholar, placing among the top 2% of scientists globally. Based on her expertise, Banu was invited to provide testimony on women and minority investors and entrepreneurs in the U.S. Senate Committee on Small Business and Entrepreneurship hearing on the SBIC program reauthorization, and she has been a speaker on topics related to inclusion and innovation at Harvard Business School, Brookings, and Oxford University, among others. She is currently a member of CNBC's Disruptor 50 Advisory Council and the Education Council at AI for All, an award-winning national nonprofit that elevates promising undergraduate talent into impactful AI roles. Her current research projects include examining the backlash to DEI and the ethical, environmental, and legal challenges in the AI industry. And as if that weren't enough, she has a forthcoming book coming out from Cambridge University Press that I hope she'll talk about as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Professor Banu. Please tell us what's on your mind today.
Thank you, Peter, and welcome to everyone. I am going to be sharing with you a set of ideas from my research, but also kind of sharing with you why these things are so important in the context of tech leadership. So welcome, and I hope you'll be joining us in the program. But what I'm going to do today is to spend maybe 15 minutes or so kind of going over some of the core ideas that are part of a core class that I teach. So I teach two half-credit classes in this program. The first one is called Entrepreneurial Thinking. It really gives you the fundamentals for creating and engaging in an entrepreneurial mindset that you can take with you anywhere, whether it's you become your own startup founder or whether you become an entrepreneur innovating within an established organization. The second class I teach is called Leading Innovation Strategy, and it sort of builds upon the idea that once you are entrepreneurial in how you think, that maybe you can deploy those practices within the organizations that you're a part of. And in the context of new technologies like AI, what I'm going to do today is kind of discuss how you might think about engaging in some of these strategic decisions. I do a lot of research and I also kind of cross that path into the world of practice, constantly in conversation with founders and tech leaders across organizations. So a lot of the work that I do is informed by academic theories, but it also has sort of practical application. So I'm going to cover these ideas today, and then we'll welcome questions or comments from you at the end. So the moment we're in is pretty interesting. And if you're like me, you've studied technology and shifts over the course of human history, this is yet another inflection point. And there are some things that maybe are a little bit different, both in terms of the scale at which we're adopting technology, the scope at which it's sort of being infused into our existing systems, and the velocity at which things are changing. So all of this combined means that leaders are paying attention to this moment and really wondering what to do, why this moment matters. So right now, about 85% of companies are saying that AI is a top strategic priority. That probably isn't a surprise to you. But about 42% of tech leaders say they lack confidence in their AI strategy. So there's a real significant gap between what they want to be able to do and what skills they have to be able to do them. And we know that they are rightly so to be concerned because we know that more value is created by organizations that have strong innovation leadership, right? So all those things combined are sort of foundational to how we think about the ways in which maybe we can benefit you. So I'm going to keep going here. So what is innovation strategy in a nutshell, right? A lot of times we talk about innovation strategy and it's an interesting idea, but let's try to maybe define our terms here because we may not all have the same understanding of what it is or how it gets done. So one of the core foundations of an innovation strategy, and this kind of goes back to my first class of entrepreneurial thinking, is you need to identify an opportunity, right? What is an unmet need out there in the world that through you and your products or services, there could be some economic opportunity. This means that you're scanning markets, looking for signals, emerging tech, and paying attention to those to find where value can be created and or disrupted. And for some of you, that might mean actually being in conversation with your existing customers to see if there are additional and different unmet needs. The second part of innovation strategy involves allocating resources, right? And this is a really big part of the whole approach that we sort of think about in our classes is how do you decide where to place your bets, essentially? How much to allocate in terms of money, resources, your budget, the talent that you have. People are finite and they have finite time. So you need to make some difficult decisions with strategic intent and discipline in order to figure out the allocation of resources. And then lastly, nothing happens in a void. Part of what we really emphasize in our program is that leadership matters, people matter. So it doesn't matter what kind of technological change you're talking about, leading change is hard and leading change is absolutely important. So when you are trying to change any aspect of your organization, particularly if you're going to create a new innovation strategy that is AI forward, then you need to drive this across all your teams, right? And inevitably, you'll probably come across folks who are not as excited about it or who are active resistors. And here we'll talk a lot about, in my classes, why culture matters. So why the culture can be helpful or a hindrance to all your innovation projects. So continue. So things have been moving really, really quickly, right, in the last sort of decade and a half. We sort of moved from AI as some tool to thinking about it as potentially providing a strategic advantage. And so if in the 2010s, the big conversations were on automation, particularly those tasks that were mundane, boring, repetitive. In the next 2 decades, we kind of talked about how do you augment the work that's being done, particularly as decisions require more support, complexity. In the last few years, we've been talking about co-creation. Generative tools have been available to us. And right now, we're sort of at the phase where we're really thinking about how do you lead? How do you have a strategic advantage where your business models are AI forward? So it's really a question of how do we lead with AI rather than, well, should we use it? And depending on where your organization is, you might be asking different questions related to how do you lead with it? Or you might be in an organization that's still at that discovery stage of like, should we even use it? So, we account for that in our program that all of you come from organizations where the use of these new technologies may be different, but that's where a lot of great learnings happen. So if we think about AI in this forward way, in the strategically forward way, we can think of it as a lever that can help us kind of gain competitive advantage, right? And so what you want to do is to do four things simultaneously. So through AI or any other emergent technology, you'd want to automate those things that are low value but repetitive. You'd want to accelerate those things that can help you iterate and learn, fail fast, essentially. You want to augment human decision making, making sure that you are accounting for prediction and insight at scale. And then lastly, you want to transform. You might have an opportunity here to completely reimagine your business model or the entire infrastructure that you use to operate, the customer survey or customer experiences, right? That you can sort of change. So there's things that you can change at scale, and we call that transformation. So where do we sort of think about people at the intersection of AI adoption. And so what's the leader's role? So while we say that technical fluency matters, that's really just part of the story. And there's sort of three things that are really, really important. So these competencies are built. Um, Not everyone has them innately, and leadership development is a really big part of that. So a leader sets the vision, right? A leader sort of defines how AI fits into your organization strategy. Because if you don't have this sort of intentionality, then adoption is kind of just like you're randomly experimenting and seeing what works and what doesn't. You also want to think about like, is your organization ready? Right? You need to do sort of an assessment, an inventory, right? You look at your talent, your data structures, infrastructures, and culture. What kind of barriers do you anticipate if you're going to go through this full-on transition and transformation through AI? And then this third part, which is where my interest really lies, is like, how do you govern responsibly? How do you establish guardrails for bias, for privacy and accountability if you're going to be using AI at scale within your organization? And if you skip this step, it is very likely you're going to be creating liability for potentially the organization, but even for yourself if you're in a position of leadership and decision making. Right? There's a lot of new opportunities. For example, you might on LinkedIn have seen new jobs called Chief AI Officer. And if you look at the duties of those folks, they range anywhere from sort of adding on to HR to sitting within legal, all the way up to sort of sitting at the C-suite, the senior leadership level. So depending on how an organization thinks about its AI use, you're going to see these different kinds of opportunities come up. So what do we know about strategy? So leadership is really important, but we also know that sometimes we make bad decisions, and bad decisions lead to bad outcomes. And so knowing what not to do is also what we learn in our classes. So one is what I call the shiny object syndrome. So you are chasing every new technological tool without necessarily a coherent strategy or because of FOMO, because the other folks, your competition is doing it. And then you sort of mistake activity, all the flurry of things you're doing as, you know, as moving forward or making progress on an issue. The second sort of reason why we see innovation programs or aspirations fail is because there's a siloed approach to AI. So AI is kind of taken up as a departmental experiment, and there's not necessarily any compounding or shared learnings across the organization as a whole. And it ends up being like a pet project within a particular department. And then lastly, is what we call misaligned incentives. When you are rewarding short-term metrics rather than sort of asking teams to take a long-term approach to innovation. Right. So, for example, there's a great news coming out recently that Meta is going to be using AI in their performance evaluations, but rather than necessarily looking at whether AI is leading to more productive outcomes, Meta's HR team decided that they're simply going to measure AI use. So that's kind of a misalignment between what they're measuring and what they're hoping for. So let me just kind of move on here. So what do we think is in the tech leadership stack? In no particular order, but also building on each other. Sort of you might start with technical fluency, right? The things that you know, the skills that you've learned and earned over your time. And we build on that layer of strategic thinking. Thinking across systems, understanding trade-offs and risks, and understanding that long-term planning and horizon is really important, that vision. You layer on top of that people leadership. So leadership here is incredibly important. That is related to how you actively create, build, and sustain cultures, particularly for innovation, how you influence people, both around you, but also those who are in different positions than you, both up and below you, and how you manage change within organizations, right? And then layered on top of that is ethical judgment. How do you deploy responsible AI systems? How do you build in a fashion that's inclusive? And how do you gain the trust of not only your employees, but your customers in a world that's incredibly tech driven? So what do we know in terms of what's happening in the world? So we know that we have higher innovation output when you have trained tech leaders versus untrained peers. We know that there's about $4.5 trillion worth of value to be had by 2030 from AI-enabled business model transformations. Um, but we also know that majority of digital transformation failures are rooted in leadership and not the tech itself. Right. And so we know there's going to be an increased demand for tech leaders who have these AI skills. And we know that any organization that wants to invest in leadership programs are going to have, better innovative leaders over time. So I'll kind of end with this is like, well, why Masters in Tech Leadership? Um, I love teaching in this program. I have some of the best students, I would say, in the university and across all our programs. They are curious. They are learning from each other, from the faculty, from the practitioners. And a lot of that has to do with the ways in which the curriculum is put together. So it's an applied curriculum. You have an amazing cohort of colleagues that become friends by the end and alumni. You have a great mix of academics and practitioners who bring really robust research experience with practitioner and real world experience. We have pretty flexible format in terms of, accommodating you in terms of both time, but your professional commitments. We've seen great career acceleration as folks graduate and take on more and bigger leadership roles or become founders themselves, sometimes do both. In a lot of ways, AI is kind of embedded in a lot of the things that we teach in the program. So rather than being siloed in necessarily just one elective, you'll kind of see it peppered throughout as AI kind of maybe shifts how we think about certain topics, or augments them, right? Key takeaways for today, maybe you have others, but I would contend that AI strategy is a leadership problem. It's not just a technical one, right? Innovation requires structures, not just inspiration and, wishful thinking. And it really is important that you continue developing your skills, and we hope that the Masters in Tech Leadership program is the right one for you. So that is it for me. So I will just kind of stop sharing and maybe take a few minutes for questions, comments, and then I will hand it off to Peter.
Thank you, Banu. There's so much to dig into. We only have a few more minutes together. All of you that are joining us this afternoon, use the Q&A button if you have any questions for me about the program or Banu about her research, her talk. I do have a couple thoughts. I'm slightly push back a little bit on what you said. Slightly. There was one slide in particular, I think it was from McKinsey, 4 point something trillion in AI productivity gain. I read an article recently from MIT Sloan, and it's been picked up Wall Street Journal, amongst other places, that um, of all the companies in the last, say, 18 months that have invested heavily in AI, 0%, zero, have shown any kind of productivity gain. And when I talk to our students that you just described, and for those of you online, our students come from every walk of life that you could imagine. They come from all across the country. Some are international. They come from every industry: finance, energy, defense, contracting, consulting, and they're all of them. I teach a course in strategy, and I could not get them to budge off AI. The future is all AI. Why? Because my boss or our boards, they're all telling us, jam it into everything you're doing. And
Yeah.
they're not even asking why or what they're hoping to realize. They're only demanding that it become part of the work stream.
Yeah.
So are you like, so okay, so that's my frame. So my first question is, do you see a future, let's say in 3 years or 5 years, where AI is more constrained than we think it is at this moment?
I think
AI adoption and its,
AI adoption.
yeah.
So that is a fair point and it's a true point. And again, I say it, that's a leadership failure, right? It is an exact reason why you need to be a good tech leader because, and I've heard this from my students too. When you go to your senior leadership and their solution is just use AI, and they just kind of wave their hand at you
Right.
without resourcing you, without strategy, and you kind of go out the door going, oh my God, what am I not doing? So that's a leadership failure. And I think when leaders figure out where and how and when to use AI within their existing systems, within their business models, then we'll have not necessarily constrained AI, but sort of a strategic use and intentional use of it. Right now, it's kind of like, well, you should use it because everyone's using it. And like I mentioned, Meta, they're completely misaligned. They're using performance evaluations by looking at how much AI you're using versus whether or not you're using it productively. So the reasons why you have this, mismatch of like you could potentially reap $4.5 trillion of, money, but without intentionally understanding where and how it should be used, what you're ending up doing is creating a lot of significant, what we call rework. You are spending so much time auditing AI for errors and inaccuracies that you've now created more work for yourself. The other thing that we're seeing is because it's not being strategically and intentionally adopted, rather than replacing work, AI is often causing folks to take on more work. So they're actually working more hours and longer hours because for various reasons, right? So there's actually an intensification. And there's pretty high implementation costs, so not just sort of economically, like financial wise, but adoption requires substantial retraining, and the returns to the employees and the company could take a long time. So, like in 3 to 5 years, we'll see if the folks who invested strategically and intentionally are reaping the benefits. And just like, there's sort of hidden costs of adoption. There is tool limitation. Sometimes, the tools are adopted, but they don't fit with the flows of work within the organization. So it becomes a cognitive burden. So there's multiple reasons why we're seeing what we're seeing. And again, I kind of go back and say, hey, it's kind of a leadership failure on all fronts that we haven't done a better job.
I think I was just listening to a podcast, an interview with Jack Clark at Anthropic, and he was not at all talking about the technical dimensions of AI. He was talking about the human dimensions,
Yeah.
much of tracking with what you're talking about today, Banu. And he likened the age that we're in right now to what you and I remember in the late 90s, the early aughts of the dot-com, right? So there was all this promise, dot-com, the dot-com bubble burst, but yes, the internet age grew up out of the ashes. But it was the Wild West, if we remember, right? I mean, there was
Yeah.
incredible fraud, piracy of all kinds. And in his view, that's where we are right now. That like AI is just the Wild West, and the
Yeah.
pendulum will swing back. And it's the strategic judgment that is required both from policymakers and organizational leaders in order to adopt it properly, productively, profitably. Um, so one of our tech leaders,
Yeah.
yeah, would agree with you. We've got a few minutes. Emma, what are some of the questions we've got from our audience?
It looks like we have a couple questions in the queue so far. So I'll start with a question that was submitted in advance to the session. And this is to Banu. What are the top three things that you want students in the MTL program to take away from it?
That's a great question. One, I think I want you to take away that technologies change, but strategic leadership and good leadership doesn't. So you need to learn how to be a good leader and use the tools that are available for you in the time that they're available to you. Two, I think I would want you to sort of think about broadly across industries and to think about not only developing your skill set to be good at your particular job, but to be good at a number of how to say this, like to be able to think entrepreneurially means that you're not necessarily locked into one kind of job your whole life. Thinking entrepreneurially and being innovative allows you the flexibility to kind of try out different jobs, try out different occupations, right? And we see that right now in industries is like the folks who have those entrepreneurial thinking skills are highly valued. The third I would say is while technical skills are important, I would say continue honing those human skills. I don't know if you remember, but in February, Daniela Amodei, who's one of the co-founders of Anthropic, said, while technical skills are important, it's really, really important that you also hone, as she put it, your human skills, those critical thinking skills. And in fact, her suggestion was, the humanities are really important. And as a liberal, arts college, that is something that we excel at Brown. So there's an infusion of sort of that critical thinking that's embedded within our curriculum. So that critical thinking skills, critical reading skills are also going to be something that you take away from our program.
Thank you. The next question in our queue is kind of a long one, but how adaptable is this program for technical leadership in general? AI is what we are discussing today, and it might be another technology in the future. How fluid or transferable is the knowledge and practice gained here for any other technology in the future?
That's another great question. It's actually one I had on my notepad here for Banu and I to talk about, in that there's always going to be another technology, right, Banu? I mean, there's always going to, we just talked about the dot-com bubble from the last generation. So there's always going to be something that's disruptive. That's the nature of capitalism. It's creative destruction. So how does one develop a strategic kind of like head on a swivel ability to see that broader operating perspective, the playing field, so you are prepared for any disruptive technology?
Yeah, so there's like three pillars I think of. Strategic foresight, like reading widely, not just technical stuff, but reading geopolitical stuff, environmental stuff, reading about the economy, financial markets. So reading widely. This is actually that's something that came out in this recent research project that I did in my book. Some of you might be familiar with the Cambridge Innovation Center, but when they're looking to create new spots around the world. They're looking at things widely. They're not just looking narrowly. So read widely so you understand impacts on your industries and your positions. The second is sort of entrepreneurial thinking. It's a way of thinking and seeing the world. I'm always looking for opportunities and unmet needs. So always being on the lookout and understand that innovation can come from anywhere. So like there's sort of reading widely, strategic foresight, understanding the ways in which you can be continuously entrepreneurial. And then third one is like always asking for feedback as a leader to figure out where those areas are for development. I think you can always continue to be a better leader. So leadership development is sort of a lifelong skill. And technology kind of is this, thing out there in the world, and it's inevitably going to change. But if you have strategic foresight, you're continuing to grow your leadership skills and you're continuing to engage in entrepreneurial thinking. I think there's no challenge, there's no technology that will sort of, you know, uh, set you back. I think you will simply figure out a way in which you can thrive.
I'll only add to the author of the question that I often use the metaphor of the letter T for what Banu is describing in our curriculum. So our students come from all these different backgrounds, and we have this very interdisciplinary curriculum that touches on all the things that we're discussing today. But all of our students come with a specialty. They all come with an expertise. They're mid-career professionals. They have 10 years of experience in some fields. Some are STEM professionals, others aren't. But this entrepreneurial thinking that Banu was talking about, in my mind, that's the broad stroke of the T. So you come with like a certain depth, an area, a background, a perspective, a culture that's guided you throughout your life. And then now, how do you apply that broadly into other areas that are maybe very unexpected? So it's the transferability of one's skills that I think kind of, in my mind, creates this space of entrepreneurial thinking and opportunity. If I got that right. Would we have time, Banu, for one more question, maybe?
If it's a good one.
Okay, Emma, let's see if we have a good one.
So it looks like our other questions in here are geared more towards you, Peter. We have two questions here, so I'll put up that last call. The first of the two, is it needed for English proficiency or the English proficiency exam for the Master's in Technology Leadership program?
If your undergraduate degree is from a non-US institution and the degree was not in English, then yes, you have to submit your TOEFL score.
Thank you. And the last question that I'm seeing here is asking who are the best persons to ask for a letter of recommendation?
They are people that have been in a position to evaluate your professional performance. So superiors, bosses, people within your business world. So the more specific you can be on every aspect of the application, the stronger your application. And that's especially true for the letters of recommendation. So weak letters, friends, colleagues, kind of personal references. Remember, these are professionals. This is a professional program. I like to say iron sharpens iron. We're very careful about how we curate that cohort experience. So people that have supervised you, those are the strongest letters.
Thank you. And it does look like we have one last question that was submitted before the session. What scholarships or fellowships are available, and how can you make yourself competitive for them?
So everyone is considered for a merit scholarship. It's based on the strength of your application. So again, the more specific you can be in your application, why this program? Why MTL? How do you imagine it's going to help you in your career path? Those are all very strong aspects of those are all aspects of a strong application. The scholarships, we have a number of them. We have the merit scholarship that everyone is considered for. That's up to 30% of the overall tuition. It's not a guarantee that it's 30, but that's its range. We have an employer tuition assistance match. So if your employer contributes to to the tuition bill, we will match that up to 20%. So that's $15,000. If your employer gives 15, that's a 40% reduction between the Brown and your employer match. We also have alumni. If one of your letters of recommendation is from a Brown alumni in any field, it could be the undergraduate or graduate departments, that's 10%. We also have quite a few B2B relationships with corporations, and you can contact me directly, and I can tell you whether or not we have that. The scholarships, by the way, they're not stackable. You would receive the largest one that you qualify for. Great question. And if that's our last question, I want to thank all of you for joining us this afternoon. We appreciate your thoughtful questions, your attention, and my special thanks to our esteemed faculty, Banu, for a terrific presentation. Thank you again, Banu. Any closing words for our audience?
Thank you, and I hope I get to see you in my classroom in the coming year. That would be wonderful. And reach out to me with any questions you have about my research or the program as well. So thank you, Peter, for having me.
What's the title of your book?
It's Entrepreneurial Ecosystems, a Transnational Perspective, and it's coming out with Cambridge University Press either December this year or January next year.
We look forward to reading it.
Thank
Thank you
you.
again,
Thank you,
Banu.
everyone.
Thank you, Emma, and thanks everybody for joining us. Take care.